The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selena Mackenzie.
Now, in the book, The Secret History of French Cooking, Luc Barr takes readers into the culinary rebellion that upended the staid French food world and reinvented the role and cultural importance of chefs and restaurants. He joins us now. Welcome to the show, Luc.
Hello. It's nice to be here.
Great to have you on the show. So why were you so interested in French cooking?
Well, I spent a lot of time traveling in France over the years. I was an editor at a travel magazine called Travel and Leisure for many years. So and my family has always traveled in France as well. My great aunt was MFK Fisher. She was a food writer. She wrote a lot of about France. So it's sort of in the ether in my family, let's say. And then in this case, I'd always thought that if people have heard of Nouvelle Cuisine, it was something kind of ridiculous and silly. That's how I thought of it. Or that's the cliche of Nouvelle Cuisine, that it's this, these large plates with tiny portions of food and ridiculous combinations of kiwi fruit and, vinegar sauces and sweet, I don't know. That was the cliche. And I think the reality is much different. And so that's why I thought I should explore this topic.
Yeah, I think if you go to a French restaurant, unless you do know, obviously you're in a different position, but I think a French menu can be quite intimidating.
Yes, that's true. It's steeped in history and, goes all the way back to Auguste Escoffier in the late 19th century, sort of establishing the strictures of haute cuisine, of French cooking, of all the classic dishes that you see on these menus. And, in the 1960s, there was a new generation of chefs who thought, well, I don't want to make the duck à l'orange like it's been again. I want to try something different. So that was the moment in the late 60s, early 70s that a new generation of chefs led by Paul Bocuse and Michel Guérard and the Trois Gros brothers decided to take on the traditions of haute cuisine, of all the classics, and try something new. And that's what became Nouvelle Cuisine.
Yeah. So do you include more modern French chefs like Raymond Blanc?
No, my story is set in the late 60s through in the 70s. And I talk a little bit in the book about what happened subsequently, but it's basically the story of the invention of this genre and the rise and fall of Nouvelle Cuisine, because, it was incredibly popular quite quickly. Paul Bocuse was on the cover of Newsweek magazine, et cetera. So there was a huge amount of press attention. And then there was an enormous backlash, and as it became overly trendy. And no, I do not write about the present day cooking scene. It's really it's a piece of social history of the 1970s and a little bit into the 80s as well.
Yeah, I get you. So I didn't realise that there was a rise and fall. So Nouvelle Cuisine is not so much used now.
Oh, absolutely not.
Wow.
Nouvelle Cuisine now is well, basically it's entirely forgotten, I guess is the truth.
Oh, what a shame.
But to the degree that it's remembered as as something that's sort of silly. But yes, there was what happened was it became so popular in the 70s that pretty soon every restaurant in France and then around the world started producing what they were calling Nouvelle Cuisine. And they, a lot of them did it poorly. So you had, sort of imitation Nouvelle Cuisine, an imitation, just to take a simple example, a salmon with a sorrel sauce, which was the classic dish at the Trois Gros restaurant that made them famous. And it was a very thin slice of salmon cooked very, very quickly and served rare with a sorrel sauce. This became so popular that pretty soon restaurants all over were producing, serving fish rare, but they didn't really quite know how to do it. And so there were a lot of restaurants that, gave Nouvelle Cuisine a bad name. So hence the downfall and the backlash.
Yeah. So what about female chefs? Because I guess back in the 70s and 80s, it was quite a male-dominated industry.
Yeah, it really was. It's interesting. My book is called The Secret History of French Cooking. And the reason I call it a secret apart from the fact that I felt that Nouvelle Cuisine, the real story, had never really been told. As I started my research, I found just concurrently with this generation that I was describing of Bocuse and Gerard and Roger Verger and all these great French chefs coming up in the 70s and inventing Nouvelle Cuisine, there was another story of these women chefs at the same time also running their own restaurants, also doing innovative things, and entirely overlooked by the culinary establishment. In fact, one of them, Annie Devine, wrote a letter to the official French chef organization, and was rejected because she was a woman. And so she decided, I'm going to start my own organization of chefs, a women's chef organization. And so my book tells the story of Annie Devine and Simone Lemaire and all the other women, Olympe, who created this organization to promote women's cooking and sort of fight the male chauvinism of the kitchen at the time, which was quite stark. I mean, Paul Bocuse, for example, was just he was a very charming guy, but a male, just a male chauvinist, like something out of the 1950s. I'd rather have a woman in my bed than behind the stove in the kitchen, or things like that. So he was quite provocative. For just to take another example, the women of this organization, the ARC, were photographed for, I guess it was for Paris Match magazine or something I forget which magazine it was. And they were photographed in the kitchen wearing white toques on their heads, the classic chef toque. Yeah. And Paul Bocuse wrote a letter, obviously sort of tongue in cheek, a letter to the women and to the magazine saying, this is an outrage that women should be wearing our toques. This is only for men. And it was done for comic effect. But the reality was, yes, it was a male only. The haute cuisine kitchens at the time were men only. So that did start to change at this time because of these women that I write about in my book.
Well done you.
Thank you.
So, as well as food, I was reading that the book is a tale of rivalries, global success, and a ferocious backlash of celebrity, money, and politics. Crikey, tell me more.
I'll tell you what. Okay, so I have a villain in this book, a true villain. And it was quite, as a writer, and I write history, this is all true stories. I can't invent a villain, but I did find myself with a wonderful villain in this time, and his name was Robert Courtine. He was the restaurant critic for Le Monde for many, many years, starting in the 1950s all the way through the 80s. Very, very powerful, the kind of guy who could make or break a restaurant. Very conservative. And he hated Nouvelle Cuisine. So he was on the warpath against Nouvelle Cuisine right from the start because he thought that, French food should be traditional. It should be the way it had always been. There was nothing really new about Nouvelle Cuisine. These were his arguments. And he heard about the women of the ARC, that organization that I talked about, and he was extremely supportive of the women because he thought, men should be out hunting and the women should be home cooking. That was kind of his cultural attitude. And so he thought these women chefs were great. They're wonderful. They're cooking delicious French food. The men of Nouvelle Cuisine were, they were overly, trendy. They didn't spend any time in their kitchens. They were, traveling in the world, making business arrangements. So that was his position. But percolating in the background were these rumors about Courtine. Who was this guy? And in fact, he was, apparently he was a collaborator during the war. Of course, there were many collaborators during the war, in France. But the reality was that Courtine truly was a Nazi. I mean, a Nazi supporting anti-Semitic guy who had written truly terrible things during the war. And this was slowly seeping out in the 70s and 80s. And I tell the story of how the truth about Robert Courtine emerged over the years. So that's just one example of the kind of politics in the background of this story. The sort of, there is a kind of French conservative chauvinist ideal of France represented by Courtine that was very opposed to this, the innovations and the, and the celebrity that was suddenly surrounding some of these chefs. They thought that was in bad taste. But the celebrity won out. Let's just put it that way. Nothing was the same after Nouvelle Cuisine. I think the culture we have now of chefs being cultural figures, of being not necessarily A-list celebrities, but they're quite known and they have cultural power. That dates back to this 1970s moment.
So it's also the story of the birth of modern food and restaurant culture, the way we eat today. So what do they call it in France now? Do they just call it cuisine?
Yeah, I'm not completely up to date on whether they're calling it modern cuisine or there's probably some new term now to describe what's happening at the moment. But I do think that we're so used to now the idea of a chef. Would you be surprised if I told you there was a hot new restaurant in Paris or Sydney or New York, where the chef grew up in Thailand but trained in a French kitchen and was now producing some sort of hybrid? That wouldn't surprise you at all. That's just par for the course now. That there's kind of a cosmopolitanism. There's an international. You can combine different flavors and different ideas in your cooking, and that chef would be celebrated in the press and a kind of a celebrity, and all of these things couldn't have happened without Nouvelle Cuisine. The idea of a chef being well known as someone who invents a new concept or a new idea for a restaurant, the idea of the chef really combining different cultures into one dish or one restaurant, the idea that you go to a restaurant in a way to be dazzled and entertained. I described earlier that's the famous salmon dish, but the idea that you sit down in a great restaurant and the famous dish that this restaurant is known for comes out to you on this large plate, and it's this dazzling presentation with the sauce arranged just so. The idea that the plate could be almost like a canvas, and that the restaurant is creating works of art, let's say, that whole idea is very much of this Nouvelle Cuisine moment, and I think lives on today.
Yeah. Is this your first book, Luke?
No, it's not. This is my third book, actually. My first book was about Provence in 1970 and about Julia Child and my great aunt MFK Fisher and James Beard. And my second book was called Ritz and Escoffier, and that was about the invention of the luxury restaurant hotel, the Savoy in London and the Ritz in Paris in the 1890s. So this is my third book about Nouvelle Cuisine.
Congratulations. It came out yesterday, I believe.
Yes, it did.
Well done. We had
a wonderful event in New York City last night. That's why I'm a little bit hoarse, as you can hear. It was wonderful. Yes.
Well done you. And for our listeners, the book is called The Secret History of French Cooking, The Outlaw Chefs Who Made Food Modern. It's by Luke Barr, who we're chatting to now. And as always, we're selling it on our website, tre.radio. Luke, do you have a website as well?
Yes, I do. It's lukebarr.net. You can go there to find out, any information you need about my books.
Great stuff. It's been lovely to chat to you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.